At 6:17 a.m., the cafe in Koreatown was supposed to be quiet, the hour when night workers slept, morning regulars whispered, and power stayed hidden behind steam and ceramic cups. Christina Wells was wiping the counter when the door opened again. Not the soft bell chime this place lived by, but a hard push that made every head lift at once. "Lock it," a man said. Another voice followed, colder. "No one leaves." Christina didn't turn right away. She heard the weight in their steps, saw the way the men fanned out without speaking. Training kicked in. 5 years of emergency rooms, the split second before a body crashes. She felt the room tense, felt herself disappear in their eyes until one of them finally looked at her. "You," he said. "Get away from him." She glanced toward the corner table. The Korean man sat perfectly still, coffee untouched, the kind of stillness that came from authority, not fear. Everyone else shrank. Christina didn't. "That's not how this place works," she said quietly. The leader laughed. "You think this is your business?" It became her business the moment she understood what they were about to do, and what they thought she was. Just a black waitress. Someone who would step aside. Someone who would survive by lowering her head. Christina's hand slid into her apron. Her breath slowed. "No," she replied, meeting his stare. "You picked the wrong morning." And in the second that followed, the first body hit the floor. Stay with this story to see why 30 armed men never walked out. Subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales, because some lives don't bend. They break the room. Christina barely had time to breathe before the weight of what happened settled over the cafe. The air still trembled with the aftershocks of violence. Broken chairs, spilled coffee, the low groans of men who moments earlier believed they owned the room. Now they lay scattered across the floor, stripped of certainty, stripped of control, stripped of the arrogance that had carried them through the door. Park stood among them like a shadow carved from steel, his gaze sweeping the destroyed space with quiet calculation. But his eyes returned to Christina again and again, as if he were measuring something far more important than fallen enemies. She felt that stare. Not possessive, not demanding, but stunned, like he'd just witnessed a truth hidden from the rest of the world. "You shouldn't have had to do this," he said. She wiped a smear of blood from her wrist, steady despite the tremor inside. "But I did." Sirens echoed somewhere in the distance, not here yet. The city responding to some other crisis that didn't involve her, didn't involve this place. For a moment she felt suspended between worlds. The one she'd known as a nurse, bound by rules and consequences, and the one unfolding now, where instinct and skill defined survival. She didn't know which was more dangerous. Park's men arrived, silent, controlled, almost ghost-like. They moved the attackers without ceremony, their faces unreadable. One of them paused beside Christina. "That was precise," he said, not quite a compliment, more like a professional acknowledgement. Christina didn't reply. She wasn't proud. She wasn't ashamed. She was simply awake in a way she hadn't been for years, awake to her own capability, to the truth she'd always carried but never used. When the cafe finally emptied, Mrs. Lim locked the door and slid down the wall, her breath shaky. "You saved us. Or made everything worse," Christina murmured. "No," Mrs. Lim said firmly. "Those men came here expecting fear. You showed them something else." Christina wasn't sure that was a good thing. She stepped outside into the pale morning light, the street strangely calm compared to the storm she'd just walked through. Park followed, hands in his pockets, demeanor deceptively relaxed. "They'll retaliate," she said. "Not immediately," Park replied. "You embarrassed them." "Good." He studied her like she wasn't someone who served coffee, like he'd known her for years instead of weeks. "You didn't hesitate." "I've seen what hesitation costs," she answered. "Christina," he said quietly, "you changed the balance today." They thought they could walk into a Korean-owned cafe, throw their weight around, and no one would challenge them. You proved them wrong. Something inside her tightened. Not pride but recognition. There had always been a line between bravery and survival. Today she had stepped over it. By evening the story had already spread. The attackers belonged to a private group operating in the gray areas of Los Angeles. Shakedowns, intimidation, laundering for higher powers. They'd been expanding into minority neighborhoods, assuming no one with influence would push back. They'd assumed wrong. Videos leaked, shaky phone recordings taken by terrified customers. None of them captured the needles, the precision, the intention behind every move, but the world saw enough. A black waitress standing alone while armed men dropped around her. Comments flooded in. Some supportive, some hateful, some fascinated. Christina ignored them all. But one message she couldn't ignore came from the hospital she once worked at. We saw the video. If you ever want to return, the board is willing to review your case. She deleted it. That chapter was closed. 3 days later, Retaliation came, but not the kind she expected. Her apartment door was left ajar when she came home from a double shift. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. Just a message carved into her kitchen table. You should have stayed in your place. Christina didn't panic. He called Park. He arrived in under 5 minutes. He read the words, jaw tightening. They're trying to scare you. It's working, she said, but her voice stayed steady. You're coming with me. No, she replied. I'm not hiding. You're not, he said. You're positioning. She didn't realize what he meant until he led her into a meeting the next night. One she had not been invited to, one she had no desire to attend. Inside a dim warehouse office, 3 Korean community leaders stared at Christina with open skepticism. A woman in her 50s spoke first. This is the girl. Park's expression sharpened. This is the woman who prevented bloodshed in a public space. She deserves a say. Christina bristled. I'm not here for a trophy. No, the woman said. You're here because your actions put a target on your back, and on us. If these men strike again, it won't just be you. Christina met her gaze evenly. So what do you want from me? Understanding, the woman replied. And truth. Christina took a breath and told them everything. How the men entered, how they moved, what they intended, how little they thought of her, of Mrs. Lim, of the cafe, of any space they believed they could dominate. She didn't dramatize. She didn't soften. She told the truth. By the time she finished, the room had shifted. One of the leaders leaned forward. They targeted that cafe because they saw it as vulnerable. They'll hit others. If we don't push back, they'll keep doing it. Park nodded. Which is why we're making this public. Christina stiffened. Public. He turned to her. People don't learn from silence. They learn from consequences. She didn't like the sound of that. But the alternative, letting the men return, letting them escalate, was worse. The next morning news broke. Not about Christina. Not about Park. But about them, the men who attacked the cafe. Their organization was revealed for what it was. A corrupt enforcement group tied to illegal seizures of immigrant businesses, extortion, and attacks masked as security disputes. Investigative reporters dug deeper. The public reacted. Community members stepped forward with testimonies they'd previously been too afraid to share. And then came the moment Christina never expected. A video surfaced. Clearer, longer, shot from beneath a table. It captured the leader laughing at her, calling her just some waitress, then threatening Mrs. Lim. It captured his voice, his pride, his mockery. It made him the villain of his own story. Within hours, his wealthy patrons dropped him. His political allies denied knowing him. His assets were frozen. His group fractured. And one by one, his men were arrested. Some on outstanding warrants. Some on charges newly brought to light. Some because their own associates turned on them to save themselves. Christina watched from the cafe counter as the leader appeared on live television, escorted in cuffs, his eyes hollow. A reporter shouted, "Do you regret attacking civilians?" His answer was swallowed by the sound of cameras clicking as thousands watched him fall publicly, painfully, irrevocably. Mrs. Lim whispered, "Justice." Christina didn't know what she felt. Relief. Anger. Closure. Maybe all of them. Maybe none. What she knew was this. He would never threaten another woman in Koreatown. He would never enter another cafe expecting submission. He would never again underestimate someone who served coffee. But the story didn't end with his arrest. It ended in the cafe. Quiet, warm, full of people again. Christina returned to pouring coffee, clearing tables, noticing details no one else saw. But now customers greeted her differently. With respect. With awe. With gratitude. A teenage girl approached shyly. "Miss Wells. My mom said you protected everyone." Christina smiled. "I protected myself. It just helped everyone else too." The girl giggled. "I want to be like you." "No," Christina said gently. "Be stronger than me." Later, as the cafe closed, Park stood at the counter watching her. "You changed everything," he said. "I didn't mean to. That's why you did." She looked around the cafe, her cafe, their sanctuary, and realized something had shifted. Not just in the neighborhood. In her. She had stepped into a version of herself she didn't know she was allowed to be. "Park?" she asked softly. "Yes," she exhaled. "What happens now?" He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Now," he said, "the people who hurt this community pay their debts. And you decide what you want to be next." She glanced at the empty room, at the place where 30 men once stood certain of their victory. "This," she said. "I want to be this. Someone who doesn't look away." Park nodded. "Then that's who you are." And as the lights dimmed and the door clicked shut, Christina felt, finally safe. Not because danger had passed, but because she had faced it, fought it, and refused to let it define her. The villains had fallen. The neighborhood had risen. Cafe had survived. And Christina Wells, once dismissed, once underestimated, had become the quiet force no one would dare overlook again. But the city hadn't seen the last of her. Not even close. By the time the cafe returned to its quiet rhythm, Christina understood something she had never admitted. Not to Park, not to Mrs. Lim, not even to herself. The moment she stood her ground, everything she believed about her own place in the world shifted. She hadn't fought to be a hero. She'd fought because truth deserved a defender, even when no one expected one to rise. In the days that followed, she noticed how her steps felt steadier, how her voice carried a weight it never had before. The fear that once curled in the corners of her life no longer owned her. She didn't chase power. She simply refused to surrender to those who misused theirs. And that quiet refusal became its own kind of strength. People came back to the cafe not because they felt safer, but because they sensed something had changed in the walls themselves, a kind of certainty stitched from her courage. Even Park, usually unreadable, watched her with a new understanding, as if he saw the shape of a future neither of them had imagined until she forced the world to stop underestimating her. Christina didn't call it transformation. She called it clarity, the kind that arrives after surviving what was meant to break you. She knew trouble would return someday. Trouble always did. But now she carried a truth no enemy could unmake. She wasn't someone who stepped aside. She was someone who stepped forward. And on a quiet evening, as she flipped the cafe sign to closed, the reflection on the glass caught her eye. Not the chaos of the past, not the shadows of those who tried to crush her, but a woman standing steady in her own story. A woman who refused to disappear. If Christina's journey spoke to you, help us bring more stories like this to life. Like, share and subscribe to Canada's Heartfelt Tales. Your support keeps these voices heard.